Thanks for inviting me, and thank you for coming out. And that thing she said about Emory professors being really smart, I got lost today, so I don't know what that says about me. So you guys are like the holy remnant here. You made it out here on a cold morning, early Saturday morning, and so hats off to you. I don't know if I'm a professional yodeler yet. I do yodel, but so I came to Emory 3.5 years ago, and it's been fantastic. The Marcus Autism Center is to say unique is not strong enough. It's an extraordinary place. It's an extraordinary enterprise that's going on there, and I'm delighted to be a part of it. What I'm going to talk about today is what I call a tale of three studies. These studies started when I was at Yale for many years, and it's about 15 years of work, and I'm going to boil it down to 20 minutes. So we're going to talk a little bit, because I know you guys are oriented to the basics of autism, but I do want to give you just a couple of comments on introduction. And then parent training, because this conference it fits in this idea of what can we do to help parents deal with this thing, children with autism. And then we'll tell you results of a major study that we completed. So autism has changed in its definition over the years. It used to be very narrowly defined. And gradually over the years, based on information, not just people making stuff up, the definition has broadened. And now we talk about the autism spectrum. A few things have endured despite the different changes in definition, and that is early onset, before the age of 30 months. That doesn't mean the whole picture is there. The child may not be diagnosable at age 2, but the signs are starting to emerge. So early onset. And central is impaired social communication. That's what it's all about. Another important feature that has been there since the beginning is repetitive behavior, restricted interest. Like, you know, you have the 4 or 5-year-old that's Dora the Explorer or Thomas the Tank Engine, an 8-year-old where it's dinosaurs, a 14-year-old where it's the British royalty. They'll tell you all the kings and queens going back a few centuries, even though they've never been to England and really don't know very much about England, but they know the British royalty. That's what we mean by restricted interest. Repetitive behavior could be motor behavior, flapping, pacing, watching the same video over and over again, playing the same video game on the iPad, and so on. I mentioned that we used to define this much more narrowly. When I was first in this business, going back to the 1980s, we said that it was 2 per 10,000, 2 to 5 per 10,000 children. Think about that, 2 to 5 per 10,000. That's a rare condition. We now say more like 6 per 1,000. The most recent study by the Centers for Disease Control, 14 per 1,000. Now wrap your head around that for a minute. 2 to 5 per 10,000 versus 14 per 1,000. If you start multiplying that out, the number increase is staggering. Every 6 per 1,000 children, school-age children, is about 300,000 children, or 300,000 children in the United States. So you can get the idea here that with the broadening of this definition, more people are going to have the condition. Do I think there's really a true rise in the prevalence of autism? That narrowly defined thing, I don't think is any more common than it was back then. We are getting better at detection, and we've broadened the phenotype, the definition. When we talk about treatment, We're either looking at the core features of the condition, the social interaction, the social communication, repetitive behavior, or we're talking about problems that make life harder for the child, the family, and so on. And that's where we have focused our work, what I call the home improvement model of autism. There are a lot of things we don't understand about autism. We don't understand why young children with autism don't seem to have the same motivation to learn things that typically developing children do. They don't seem to be that interested in interacting with other people. They don't seem to be that interested in learning new skills of everyday life. So if you add to that behavior problems, children that protest when the mother's trying to get the child to learn how to dress himself, the child who protests when it's time to come to dinner, and when your parent tries to get the child to eat a new food. If you add that to the mix of this motivational state that we don't understand very well, this is tough. This is very tough. This is very tough. And the child does not accumulate skills of everyday life. The child doesn't perform even the skills that they have on a regular basis because they're just not that interested. As one mother told me, it's not that he can't do it, he won't do it. So this provides an important moment for us to try to bring in an intervention to improve life at home. So we started with medications. This is back in the late 90s. We were fortunate to get governmental funding to join forces with other centers around the country, and we studied a drug called risperidone. And what were we targeting? We were targeting tantrums, aggression, self-injury, non-compliant behavior, protesting over routine requests of life, and so on. And it worked. It worked, but it's a powerful drug. We don't want to just be giving this drug sort of casually. So after we finished that study, we said, let's see if we can bring in some parent training. Parent training is specific techniques to teach the parent how to manage these troublesome behaviors, not to cure autism, to manage tantrums, aggression, non-compliant behavior, protesting behavior. And in fact, the combination of drug plus parent training was better than the drug alone, even though the drug works. So then we got a little bolder and said, let's just try parent training without the medication. And we were especially interested in doing this intervention with younger children, children where most parents and most clinicians would be reluctant to give a powerful drug to a 3-year-old. So that's the lineage of studies. So the first study was published in 2002, 2009, and then most recently we published a paper in 2015. And this is the paper. And you see it's got a string of authors. That's because there are 6 sites. There were 6 sites involved in this project. We had to teach people how to do this parent training intervention. We had to make sure that they were all doing it the same. They wouldn't be any good if everybody was doing their own thing. We had many other investigators that played very important supportive roles. It was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is in the United States, it's probably the top journal in medicine. Why did they publish it in that journal? Because it was the first study of its type. What we did is we said, let's try this parent training. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. We want to compare it to something that is likely to be going on out there in the community. In other words, we don't want to just have the people in a waiting list or hanging out doing nothing. We wanted to compare parent training to a sturdy control condition, parent education. Remember, these are children, they're age 3 to 7. Many of the children were newly diagnosed. We assumed that giving parents information about autism would be useful, and it was. So this is a tough test for the parent training study. It's a 24-week trial. Both treatments had 13 sessions, more or less, over the 24 weeks, so not weekly, not terribly expensive, and we believe exportable. The primary outcomes were parent ratings on the child's behavior. Now, the parents weren't blinded. They knew which treatment they were in. But we also had a blinded evaluator, a person who we taught how to elicit information from the parents and make a judgment about whether the child was doing better or not. Disruptive behavior problems. Sorry. So why parent training? If you go outside the world of autism, in the world of child mental health, it is the best psychotherapy intervention, bar none. It is the best intervention that we have. But it hasn't been tried in autism, strangely enough. Plenty models out there, but guess what? There was no manual, there was no off-the-shelf program for us to go with, so we had to make up our own. And it took some years. It took some years to work it all out. What are the basics? The basics come from a world called Applied Behavioral Analysis, ABA. Is that a familiar term? ABA. What ABA brought to the table is this notion of antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. Many parents can be very eloquent about the B, about the behavior. And then we say, well, what's going on before that behavior? And a lot of times we'll hear, oh, it's unpredictable. It's out of the blue. You never know when he's going to blow. You could be true, but most of the time it's not true. Most of the time, with a little bit of questions and answers, you can find out that in certain situations, these behaviors are more likely to happen. The child who protests while getting dressed, it's the challenge of getting dressed that the child is not interested in. And the child would rather get out of doing that routine demand. That's the antecedent. The behavior is the tantrum. What's the consequence? What do we mean by that? What happens after the behavior? And what we often find out is inadvertently, the parent gets caught actually responding in a way that reinforces the behavior. So if the parent allows the child to escape the demand and finishes the job for the child, that behavior, that tantrum is actually reinforced. That's the principle. We also teach positive reinforcement. We also teach methods of growing compliant behavior. So it's not just this deconstruction model, but that's the center of it. So our other guiding feature was something I alluded to earlier. And that is that serious behavior problems get in the way of the child accumulating skills of everyday life. So if we reduce the behavior problems, the child's skill level has a chance to start building up again. So we wanted to decrease the troublesome behavior, and we hoped that would contribute to improvement in daily living skill. So the children were 3 to 7. They all had a DSM diagnosis of autism spectrum. In fact, most of them met the more narrow definition of autism. They had to have disruptive behavior to get in the trial. I won't go into the details of that, but it wasn't all comers. It was children with disruptive behavior problems. And both interventions were delivered individually to a parent or two parents. And both in both treatments, 13 visits over 6 months, 60 to 90 minutes. Both of them had scripts for the therapist, had activities that were meant to go on in each session, homework. In parent training, we sent the parents home to say, try this. So they were similar in their intensity, but the content was different. Parent education, no information about management of behavior. Parent-reported outcomes were about disruptive behavior. And then we had this blinded evaluator. Time doesn't allow me to go into what this blinded evaluator did, but it was very important because we wanted somebody to weigh in on whether the child was better or not, who did not know which treatment the person was in, parent was in. So mostly boys, as you would expect. You can see the age is less than 5 years old on average. Surprising to us that we did not exclude on IQ, but it turned out that most children had above 70 IQ. In other words, in the normal range of IQ. Most were Caucasian, and very few were on medication. Very few. Now, I'm going to ask you to stare at this for a minute. It takes a little bit of orientation. The red line is the parent education. The blue line is the parent training. And this is a measure completed by the parent every month about tantrums, aggression, self-injurious behavior. The 24 at the beginning, you see 24 at the beginning? That goes along with children with serious behavior problems. It's not through the roof, but it's up there. And at the end of the 24 weeks, the blue line, the improvement is about 50%. But notice the parent education is not, there's something going on there. There's improvement. But the difference between the two groups is what we call statistically significant, clinically important. And when we asked the independent evaluator to make a judgment, it boiled down to yes or no. It boiled down to yes, this kid is better, or no, he's not. And that's a very simple statistic. And this is what it looks like. Every month, parents came in and we had this semi-structured method of eliciting information from the parent, and then the independent evaluator made a call, better or not. And at the end of the 24 weeks, 70% of the children in parent training by a blinded rater was rated much better, or very much better, compared to about 40% in parent education. Again, parent education is not a wimpy control condition. It's a solid treatment. But the difference, 30% difference in the response rate is statistically important and clinically important. What about daily living skill? Again, I don't have time to go into the details of this measure, but this is a measure by interview from the parent, that asks about everyday life activities, using utensils, coming to the table, getting dressed, regular everyday activities. The blue line, again, is the parent training group. Even though the parent education group improved on the other measures, there is no improvement in daily living skill. That's the red line. It's flat. Whereas the blue line shows real improvement. Again, statistically significant and clinically important. It goes along with our basic idea that troublesome behavior gets in the way of everyday living skills. Last but not least, because everybody always asks me this, say, okay, they were better at 6 months, but did they stay better? And the answer is yes. Now, this is no longer the two groups, parent education, parent training. This is just the kids who got the parent training. The red line are those 30% of children that were not rated as much better or very much better. The blue line is the 70% of children that were rated as improved. And you could see that even though they were not rated as improved on the red line, when we say simply better or not better, they were showing some improvement, but not good enough. And they started to drift back 6 months later. Not all the way back to baseline, but there's some return in the wrong direction. By contrast, the kids who were rated as better at the end of 24 weeks stayed that way for another 6 months. So, parent training beat parent education on parent ratings of disruptive behavior. That was the first slide I showed. Also, by a blinded clinician who didn't know which treatment the parent was in or the child was getting, was also much better, and the gains maintained at 6 months post-treatment. It was a multi-site trial funded by the government. We're going to play Price is Right. How much do you think it cost? This is what it takes to do this kind of a study. We now have the manual. It's now available on our website, rubynetwork.org. We think this is an exportable treatment, and we are working hard to do that. Thank you very much.